Thank you very much. It is always an honor and a privilege to meet with you, and always a lot of fun to come back home. When I first went to Washington 24 years ago, I found out something that startled me, and that was that 80% of the lobbyists in Washington don't lobby Congress. They lobby federal agencies. They are busy working with federal agencies on regulations. They're trying to keep their clients in compliance. They're trying to shape those regulations. They really don't go to the Hill very often at all. Of the 20% that lobby Congress, more than half are what is called single-issue lobbyists. They spend all of their time and effort on a single issue, sometimes a very narrow slice of an issue. Those three main issues that attract the most single-issue lobbyists are defense, taxes, and health care. So what's left? The dogs and cats like me. And I'm what's known in the trade as the shoe leather lobbyist. What that means is I spend my time going from office to office, member to member, staffer to staff, committee to committee, House to Senate, and Senate to House. I do that on your behalf. The key question I'm often asked is, well, that sounds like fun. How do you get past the receptionist? Remember that Congress gets about 20 million pieces of mail a year. Now all of that has to go through decontamination, and it arrives on the Hill in little, ugly, terrible smelling pieces. If you want to write or a member of Congress, don't mail it. Hand deliver it or fax it or email. Because of that, Congress now gets 182 million emails a year. And it's no wonder that they set their spam programs often to trap anything with an attachment. It's very hard to talk about water quality or air quality or transportation without an attachment. But we're learning. The other thing to remember is that many of the congressional staff view their email on a BlackBerry. That means you have to speak BlackBerry. You have to know the abbreviations, you have to keep your messages very short and terse, and you better answer within 5 seconds of getting an answer or they feel neglected. So the whole framework for communication on the Hill has changed. Why do they even bother meeting with me? It's not because of me, it's because of you. I represent you in Washington as your eyes, your ears, and your voice. The things I tell those folks aren't things I invented. They are things you tell me it is important for Congress to know. Between the NOACA staff, you, and I, and congressional staff, we all keep our eyes on the horizon, looking for legislative opportunities that can get you money or get you a change in policy, whatever it is that you need to get your job done. So my mission is to take your message to them as accurately, transparently, and relentlessly as possible. When they see me coming, they usually know that I will wait until they're free or we will make another appointment to talk. We never let them off the hook. Because they know that, they're usually willing to meet with us whenever we need to. We try to do it quickly, we don't waste their time, we try to get them information early enough so that if they have a chance, they can make a difference on a piece of legislation. The other half of my mission is to bring information back to you as transparently and accurately as I can on what's happening in Congress. And what I'd like to do today is to share a little bit of my perspective on where we are now, where we're going, what lies ahead, and why I am more concerned now than at any time I have been in either Washington or Cleveland about the future of infrastructure. In dealing with Congress, I learned a lot of things, but there's 3 lessons today I'd like to bring to your attention. The first is that it's easier to change a law than a regulation. And it's easier to change the regulation than a policy, especially if that policy rhymes. Irwin O'Neill will know what I'm talking about, and that is 20 is plenty. Apparently at some happy hour at EPA a number of years ago, it was decided that regardless of your ability to pay, or whether or not you lived on a Great Lake, or whether or not you had rainfall or desert, in 20 years you were to be in compliance with a whole set of requirements of the Clean Water Act. That is nowhere in law. That is nowhere in regulation. It's a policy. And that policy could cost Northeast Ohio more than $1 billion, which wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing if it was a well-spent $1 billion. But some of that money they want us to spend on things that make no measurable difference in the environment, which I don't think is fair, and I don't think that was congressional intent or voter intent when we passed the Clean Water Act. So in order to deal with a policy you can't live with, you have to change the law. On the water issue, that has been very difficult because of the next lesson I learned. A wise man once told me that Congress paints with a broad brush. He also told me that it doesn't paint very often. And I didn't understand what he was talking about until I noticed that highway transit bills only get authorized every 5 or 6 years, and the Clean Water Act has never been reauthorized, not in 35 years. That means it stays alive solely on its appropriation each year. And appropriators have lots of other things to think about. They don't oversee EPA. Once in a while we'll get a little language in the bill that tries to keep EPA on a productive track, or that compliments them for something we feel was worthwhile, but it's not really run or overseen very much by Congress because it's kept alive on an appropriations bill. The third lesson I learned was that the best lobbyists in Washington are not outsiders, they're insiders. And by that I mean sitting members of Congress. Yes, former members of Congress can be very helpful, but it's sitting members of Congress talking to each other that can make the biggest difference. And I'm going to show you how we use that and how well a delegation performed in the next thing I share with you. As always, every report has good news and bad news. Let's start with transportation, specific surface transportation, highways, highway safety, and transit. The good news is we now get, instead of the 61 cents back we got in 1981, we get $1.05 back for every dollar. The bad news is the canary is dead. In a coal mine, when the canary started looking ill, people got worried and either left or did something dramatic. The canary has been ill for several years, and now the canary is dead. And people in Congress don't necessarily understand what that means to you. Let's start with the good news first, because it is very instructive for what we're going to have to do again. What this shows is that in 1981, we got 61 cents back for every dollar we contributed to the Highway Trust Fund, but it doesn't show two other very important things. The first is that that money was not sub-allocated to urban areas very well. There was something called the M program, which David Owens knows a lot about. But something called the obligation ceiling would always get in the way, and by the time ODOT had spent all the money it could under federal law, there wasn't any left for the Urban M program, or at least not very much. The other thing to remember about 1981 is we did not have any dedicated funds supporting transit. In that time, we had a very robust federal transit program, but it depended entirely on general revenue, and it was subject to the whims of the budget process every year.